Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Quantopian Show. In our inaugural season, we're conducting a retrospective on Quantopian. Quantopian was a crowdsourced quantitative hedge fund that launched in 2012 and shut down for good in November of 2020. I'm Foss, and I was one of the founders and the CEO of Quantopian. To me, the most important and innovative part of Quantopian was our community. Quant finance is a secretive field, and back in 2012, there just wasn't any form of community. We wanted our community to span novices and professionals. Building a community is like building a campfire. To get started, it takes a huge effort, but eventually it becomes self-sustaining. When we first launched our community, we wrote the initial posts, demonstrated how to share code and backtests, and we answered every question. As the community grew, certain members showed up with a natural motivation to do the same. Members who rallied around the platform and became well-known and highly respected by the rest of the community. One such member is Dan Whitnable, who combined his knowledge of Python, finance, and our platform with impeccably clear writing. Eventually, we asked Dan to join the Quantopian team, and I'm grateful he accepted. Dan has a unique perspective as a longtime Quantopian community member and a Quantopian teammate. After the last episode with Jean Berdesh, Dan sent me a beautifully written and incisive retrospective. I loved his candor and point of view, and I think you will too. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Boss, yeah, thank you very much for this, and it's great to reconnect and to share some of my feelings and a very good introduction.
Yeah, I think everyone's really excited to hear from you, Dan, since you're such a well-known guy in the Quantopian and quant community at large. Still active in the quant community, you were telling me?
Yeah, so since Quantopian, I left and I'm working at Alpaca, which is an online brokerage company, and doing much the same thing I did at Quantopian, and that is working with individuals with writing trading algorithms. And it's something I'm still very passionate about.
I think that makes you like the world's leading expert in assisting people in writing individual trading algos. That's two really like significant experiences.
Well, and it's not just assisting the people. I guess I've started to gain an appreciation and understanding of the type of person that is attracted to this field. And that's been a little bit of an eye-opener for me along my journey too.
Oh man, my interest is piqued. You got to tell me, like, who are these people?
We can probably get into that a little bit more as the discussion goes on. But yeah, I use the term. We all remember back to our high school math days and Venn diagrams, and where you have these three circles, and one of them for traders in our field is someone with a reasonable understanding of computer coding. Then you have another circle, which is someone that has the wherewithal, be that time, be that money, be that drive or whatever, and call that another circle. And then just sheerly for trading, if someone is actually doing their own trading, they have to have enough funds to actually trade something. And you can kind of think that the people who have a lot of funds to trade are people that are over 60. And unfortunately, that doesn't intersect well with that circle of people who have the technical programming ability. And so you kind of take these three circles, and that overlap are the people that are really engaged with algo trading. And it's a small subset. And right. I think we kind of found that out in Quantopian, that at any given time, there wasn't more than 2, 3, 4, 5,000 active users, even though the total number of users who came to the platform were 2, 3, 4, 500,000.
Right. Yeah, it's like 1 or 2%, right? Have all three. And I always thought that the capital, having the money was the tightest filter. I think having the time and the interest and even the coding skills, I think those are much bigger sets than than the third.
Yeah, something just lately that's improved that in the finance field is fractional shares.
For sure. Yeah.
That's helped lower the bar for a lot of individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty amazing, actually. And I think you can see that spreading out to other asset classes too, not just stocks. So it's exciting to think about fractionalizing everything and having greater access and what it might mean. I think customers and users love it because you can think in dollars, right? You don't have to worry about shares. It's like a really
Yeah.
simple change, but I think makes it much easier to think about a portfolio and allocations and things like that. So part of all this is to learn, and part of the learning in this retro is to gain perspective. And so I'd love to understand your perspective on Quantopian, how you saw the company from the outside initially as a community member, what it meant for you, and kind of like what was Quantopian for you?
Yeah. So your question about how did I view Quantopian, I think really hits on big issue that I sort of look at companies as a lot like individuals, and healthy individuals, I think, are pretty well aligned in how you see yourself with how others see you, and then kind of how you see yourself in the future or what your goals are. If you can get those pretty well aligned, that's sort of a healthy individual. Companies are a lot like that, I think. And if you can get your employees, your customers, your stakeholders all aligned and looking at the company the same way, the better. And to your point, or to your question, Foss, about how did I view it, I came in strictly as a pure narcissistic, looking for my own. I was looking for a backtesting platform, and I think a large chunk of the users, the community, was doing the same. And for backtesting, it's more complex, as we found out, than a
Yeah.
lot of people appreciate. But at a minimum, you need sort of the structure, but you need the data too. And that was a big chunk of, or I think is still a huge hurdle for individual traders, is just getting access to the data. So I had been personally trading since, let's say, 2000. My first algo was in Visual Basic and Excel, scraping from Yahoo, and
Oh, no way. I
and
love it.
then coming up with a list of buy stocks. And that was back kind of before the internet. And I actually called my broker and said, hey, I want to buy this, sell
So
this,
you
buy
had
this.
an algo that told you the buy sell list, and you would like literally pick
Yeah.
up
And
the
then I
phone
would
and
call it
dial it
in the
in.
morning. Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's amazing.
I lost interest in that pretty quick because it was just so time consuming. But anyway, I was looking for alternatives and stumbled across Quantopian. And so that was my perspective. And then, of course, became active in the community and worked from there. So my view and how I used it was primarily as a back tester. And we can probably get into this more a little bit later too, but that was one of the points of misalignment a little bit, in that
Mm,
the criteria for any of the contests were completely different than my criteria as an
right.
individual investment. And so then I had a decision to make, that I said, where is the biggest bang for my buck in terms of time, investment and time? I could maybe I could spend time on writing a contest algo and maybe get an allotment, but I kind
Yep.
of look at
Yep.
that as, pie in the sky, or probably a much less risk from my standpoint, or a much better use of my time, is to find an algo that works, that satisfies my investment goals. Through all my years there, I never entered the contest at all.
So I think this is like a really deep observation on the company, this concept of alignment, and I love what you wrote about it in the note you sent me. And I think it took me anyway like years to realize that the work that people were doing for their own account was not the same as the work that we needed to do for the fund, which I feel like really naive saying that, but it took a long time for that to be clear.
Mhm.
I'd love to just dwell on your motivations for a bit. The need that you had for the back tester is clear. It's very practical.
Mhm.
Um, but what about the community? Like, what was it about the community that kind of drew you in? Because you were a fairly prolific community member, and you just like naturally jumped into this role where you were just helping. It seemed like everybody. What motivated you to kind of work that hard to help other people like that?
I think it's kind of hardwired. I don't know, but I had for years been in management. That's kind of my background is software
Mhm.
engineering, and I was a manager of different engineering groups. And the thing that I always really liked about it, enjoyed, and what drove me is the idea of working together with the people on my teams,
Yep.
then mentoring them. And I tell you, the biggest excitement, the two things that I found most exciting. Well, first off, I'll tell you, in any room, except at Quantopian, I will say, but in any room, I generally feel I'm the smartest guy in the room. And starting off with that as a premise, going into a meeting with three other individuals and coming out of that meeting with a better idea than I ever could have come up with on my own, what I found so exciting that
Mhm.
that collaboration really does work. The next thing that I really drove me was also working with other individuals, mentoring them. Mentoring sounds kind of hierarchical, but the idea I really enjoyed seeing that aha moment in others to
Hmm.
say, oh, I get it now, or oh, this works. And both of those things I got from Quantopian. So in a way, it kind of fed my being able to work with others and come up with something better than I could have on my own. But then also, as you started off, the whole algo community is pretty tight-lipped. So
Mhm.
that doesn't happen very often. But really, it was more the second, being able to help individuals and for them to be able to say, oh, I see now. And that's a bit of a challenge because not everyone sees the same way. And I think it's something that I enjoy or feel I'm good at or whatever. And that is the ability to really understand what is the question someone is asking.
Oh, I love that. What do you mean by that?
Well, go beyond the words. Oftentimes people say, I don't, how does this work? And really what they're asking is, I'm doing this, why doesn't it work? Or something like that. I
Yeah.
can't think of an example, but it's reading between the lines and saying, oh, step back. Here's your stumbling block. Here's the mental block you need to get over. Here's the way you need to redo your concept of the problem. And then I think you can move forward. So it's being able to work with individuals like that. So that was really it. I just enjoyed doing that, and it was in Quantopian had a real nice venue. It was something I was very interested in, and in a very real sense, it was something completely different. At the time, I was full-time engineering, not in finance at all, and so in some ways, it was a bit of a something else to do.
So Dan, you mentioned that this like motivation to like help other people and get them to an epiphany about their problem,
Mhm.
was what motivated you at work. But like where did that come from? Is this something that is like lifelong? Did you discover it when you started working, or is this like a motivation that
That no, it wasn't lifelong. For whatever reason, you get tracked into a certain field, and I found myself in engineering and found myself building things. And
Mhm.
once you build so many things, you, like I said, start working with other people, and then you start realizing, or I started to realize that I could always build something, but how could I work with someone else to build it better? How could, it's kind of like teach a person how to fish. thing.
Yeah.
I always found that, wow, if I could get these three people to do what I'm doing, hey, we'll be much better off. So it really was just a natural extension to a certain degree. I think that a lot of doers turn into teachers after a while.
So, this is how you ended up in the community, and I just remember you were like Quantopian famous because everyone on the team would time to time talk about like this amazing post or this helpful thing you did for another community member, and we reached out to you, and I'm just curious, like, what motivated you to join the company?
Yeah, well, that was kind of a funny thing. So I think it was like 2016 maybe is when I started using
Yep.
the back tester. That was probably about after hearing the interview with Jean that you did previously. I guess I appreciated or didn't appreciate that was when you first kind of rolled out the back tester. So that was when
Yep.
I started using it. That was when 2016, 17, I became active in the community. And Jamie McCorriston reached out to me and asked if I could speak at a Quantopian meetup in Chicago. And I think that was in like June of 2017. So I drove down to Chicago, met with Jamie, and there were probably a dozen other Quantopian users in the room. And I gave this talk. And afterwards, we were sitting around drinking some beers, and I mentioned to Jamie that what do I do, and I was an engineer, and I said, but I hope to retire someday and do full-time trading. And Jamie said, well, give me a call when you decide to retire. And sure enough, a couple 3 years later, one thing led to another, and I was thinking about going full-time trading and moving away from engineering. And the stars aligned. I got a hold of Jamie, and he said, well, rather than retire, how would you like to do something with Quantopian? And I couldn't believe that would even be an opportunity. And my career moved from building automation systems to finance at that point. And I never looked back, and enjoy that I made the move. So I thank you, Jamie, if you're listening to this.
Yeah. I hope he is. I think it's just like so interesting, to think about having your perspective as a community member and then kind of like going behind the curtain. I'm interested to hear like what sort of changed for you in that transition, and maybe like what your hopes and dreams were for Quantopian, the company, and your role in it, and then kind of like how it actually played out.
Yeah, my hopes and dreams were to stay there longer.
And
um,
me too.
but I liked the role itself. And I tell you, peering behind the curtain, oftentimes when you go into any situation, companies, and you look behind that curtain, it's kind of like that Wizard of Oz moment that you realize there's not a lot there. It was completely the opposite with Quantopian. I tell you, one of the things that I was surprised, I guess I shouldn't have been, but surprised and enjoyed were the individuals working at Quantopian. How everyone was serious and professional. And I tell you, some of the smartest people I've ever worked with in any of my positions. And that was a big surprise to me, that just the quality of the staff there. And I could name them off, but I suppose if I started naming them, then I'd forget some, and then
Yeah.
I'd feel bad.
Yeah, you
But
have to do everyone, right? Right. Yeah. I
yeah,
feel like one of the things about Quantopian's internal culture was everyone was sort of a person of substance. There weren't, there was no one who was sort of frivolous about what we
right.
were doing.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of attracts a certain kind of person, and it's the type of person I really myself enjoy working with. So
Hmm.
I think I love hearing you talk about it, but I obviously felt the same way. Like, really respected all the people, but the attitude that people had toward their work, I found like really refreshing. It's just
Hmm.
like deep devotion to doing a high quality job. So I love this idea of alignment. I thought of a couple of questions about things that weren't aligned, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about finding alignment, finding misalignment, And,
Yeah,
like one thing is building a community at odds with building a quant hedge fund, like this whole premise here based on
right.
a conflict.
Well, I'll start a little bit, if only because it's kind of fresh in my mind. I just before this, I rewatched your interview with John, and one of the things that he brought up after listening to that, that it was as he was talking about how long it took to get up to speed and
Hmm.
coming up with a minimal viable product, an MVP. And what he was referring to when he was talking about an MVP was the algo infrastructure.
Hmm.
And it's that struck me as sort of, well, here's a problem right here. Here's a misalignment right here. If you think about what a product is, in its very basic sense, and maybe this is where everyone in a company should be aligned, is on a definition of product, is narrowly defining it as, at the end of the day, what pays your salary? And everyone should say, well, that's the product. You can be doing a lot of things, but what are you selling? And it was interesting that John talked about an MVP, and of course that was maybe in a little bit different context, and I understand, but was the infrastructure. Whereas I think what Quantopian could have improved is come up with, when you talk about an MVP, what is the minimum viable fund? The
Yeah.
product was the fund. And I was a little bit on the outside. So maybe this was their boss, and you can jump in and correct me.
No,
But
I think
but
you're like, you're hitting the right chord here.
that I never saw someone hold up and say, here's an MVP fund. If we can do this, then we can go on, and we can be, do bigger and better things. So that would be one of the things where I think that we were a little bit misaligned, is what was the product that we had. And certainly that was a misalignment between the community members. A lot of the community weren't involved with the fund at all, and weren't
Yeah.
all moving in the same direction.
I really like the way that you put it. It's different than the way that I've been thinking about this over the years. I remember a long time ago, I had this great conversation. I don't know if it was great. It was an insightful conversation. It was an insightful conversation with Rob Stavis, who is one of our board members. And, he's got a background that, deep finance and then venture. And so, he's run businesses in finance, he's run, startups. So he's got like a really interesting mix of perspectives, but really strong like operator. He's really fun to talk to because his mind is like very quick, so I always, whenever I talk to him, I sort of feel like I'm mentally running a sprint, and which is fun for a while. But we were talking, and it was sort of like in the middle of Quantopian's run, and we were just getting to the point where we were putting together a set of algos to run portfolios, and kind of to your point, just starting to look at what the fund would look like. And as I was talking to him, all of a sudden I just got that like cold tremor down my spine, because it was like year 4, and all of a sudden I thought to myself, oh my God, we're just for the first time doing
Doing,
the thing that we're here to do.
yeah.
I also, I think, was realizing while talking to Rob and fielding all of his like pretty deep questions about how the fund would work and what its structure would be and properties and how to combine these things, and what are the trading costs going to look like, and how are you going to neutralize risks. He's really deep in the area, so we had a lot of deep questions. The sort of recursive epiphany for me was, that's going to take a long time for us to figure out. We're going to have to work really hard for a long time to figure out how to put all this together.
Mhm.
This is like one of the biggest lessons for me from Quantopian, is that you can have this like grand vision of what you want to be in the future. And one of the most difficult things is to figure out like, what is the first step in the right direction,
Mm.
to get there. And I think it's hard to pick that right out of the blue, right from go, but you need to be looking, right? You need to be trying to find that gradient that you're going to walk up.
Mhm.
Building a fully functional fund, which is what we did, probably isn't the right first step.
Yeah, and the other thing that I phrased this at various times, different ways, and I think we all kind of saw it, is I think there were too many, or at least too many too early constraints put on strategies or the fund. And I think that played out a couple different ways. One of the things is it just made it extremely hard
Yeah.
and people got disillusioned. But maybe I'll use an analogy here. I'm great with analogies, but if you think of the fund as maybe searching for new alpha, that was
Yep.
probably ultimately. And think of an analogy as say you're some scientists that get together and you want to go out and search for new animal species. You want to,
Okay.
that they're out there. We just need to find them. And so how might you do that? And so I think you would start off on a real small scale and you'd say, okay, how about if we get a couple of these scientists to go out into a forest for a week and see if they can find some new species? And if things went right, they would. They'd say, yeah, we spent a week there and we found 2 new species. Great. Then they come back to the office and they say, how could we scale this up? Well, there's probably a reasonable idea that if we look in different forests, we would find different species. If we looked all around the world, but we just need a lot of people to do this to cover this much geography. So let's crowdsource this. That's kind of an analogy for maybe what
Yep.
Quantopian was doing. But
Yeah, I think it's a good analogy, actually.
okay, but I think this is what really happened. So that's what I think should have happened, maybe. Here's what I think really happened. Exact same thing. We got these scientists together and they said, but they added an extra constraint. They said, instead of searching for new animals, we want to search for new animals that look like unicorns. So the same thing happened. These scientists went out in the forest for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, they didn't find any new animals that looked like unicorns. But then they went back to the office, and for some leap of faith, they said, "But you know what? We can find unicorns if we just had more people." And we crowdsourced it.
Yeah.
I think
I love it. Oh my gosh, I love it.
that was the mistake, I think.
Yeah. 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 And I think like compounding that mistake is like some of the scientists came back and were like, hey, we found the Loch Ness monster. Is that something you might be interested in?
Right.
We were like, no, 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 no. We
Exactly.
need unicorns, unicorns.
Exactly. Yep. And so that's what I think starting off with fewer constraints could have helped with.
Yeah.
Is it could have led down different paths. To a certain degree, you ended up that like that with the idea of combining alphas at the very end.
Right. But I think, it's like, sorry, I'm having like an epiphany right now. I feel like the MVP is actually the individual signal. We kind of like, we went through this whole arc and at the end we were like, oh, we should be combining signals. So if the investment strategy is combine signals, then, maybe the boil down is like, hey, let's start with finding and evaluating just one signal. Like, can we find one signal that's interesting?
Yeah.
I think if we did that, maybe it would be more like the original version of the analogy where people are out just looking for anything new, as opposed to the unicorn. I love the unicorn. Interestingly, a long time ago, I read an article in National Geographic about, I think it's entomology, right? That's the study of bugs.
Yeah.
And there are many species, obviously, and over time, the species that are sort of discovered first are the ones that are larger and can move greater distances because they just have like a higher probability of people running into them.
Okay.
And then over time, like the discovery gets like to smaller and smaller and more, less and less mobile species, which I think actually is a lot like alpha. They talk about like the age of macro alpha when you could run, mean reversion and be highly profitable, which is another interesting thing. I'd love your thoughts on this because, you've been really active in 2 global communities, global trading communities. And over the past couple of weeks, from waking up the newsletter and doing the interview with Jean, I've gotten just a ton of email, which has been super fun to read. And one of the things that a lot of I would say professional set, so like professional quants that were kind of watching Quantopian, one of the things that they really were highlighting is this, oh gosh, how to describe the idea? This idea of like over constraining the search, and
Mm,
that, the timing and the focus, the timing being like in the late teens and the focus being the US equities market,
hmm
that both, the timing and or the focus were wrong. Like if we were to try to crowdsource US equity strategies in the late 90s, maybe that would have been super successful
hmm
because, it was easier to find and get started. And so one thing I've been wondering about is maybe the MVP should have been outside the US markets, like a less, like a younger marketplace with more opportunity.
hmm Possibly, yeah. The other way that where I thought you were going with this is kind of, for lack of a better term, sort of meta factors. Or I tell you, over the 20 years that I've been trading, I always wanted to hold on to the belief that that it was driven by some basic market psychology. And maybe it would be small alpha, but there's always something there that generally drives things. And to an extent, it's, say, momentum.
Yeah.
If people see a stock go up, then it's going to keep going up or down. But yet I have been proven wrong time and time and time again that you can come up with a strategy like that and it works for a month, 6 months, a year, and then it doesn't. But then it starts working again.
Yeah.
And I wondered about that concept of having the community look at, why doesn't this work anymore? Or, is there a relationship for, between these two factors, why they're cyclical or something like that? That would be the type of, going back to what you were saying about the Loch Ness Monster. It would be if you set the community out to say, look for any kind of anomalies, look for any kind of factors.
Mm.
Maybe some of those things would have come up that could have been useful rather than just like a basic raw factor, as one example.
Yeah, actually, I think there's like sort of two financial concepts that you're talking about that I think one is I think factor timing, right? So they're, just like established factors and they have, a relationship amongst them and cycles. And if you could time factors, right, you could have a very high capacity, very profitable strategy. And I think factor timing is really similar to market timing, right? And so kind of the accepted wisdom is it's extremely difficult to
Right.
consistently time factors. And I think the turning points are pretty sparse over time. So, not tons to work with. But, it's tantalizing to think of doing it because it would just be like such a phenomenally profitable strategy. So, another question I wanted to kind of start you down on was just turning points for Quantopian. What did you see as like sort of the major turning points up and down as you were, maybe in the community, maybe when you were on the team?
Yeah, let's see. I certainly, the big shakeup for a lot of people, me a little bit. Well, actually, it's sort of funny too. My timing throughout my life has not been great on things. Looking back, and one of them was an algo that I had all ready to turn on to go live the week before Quantopian shut down live trading. So I that would
Oh
be
man, I feel like I just have to say I'm sorry.
well, no, maybe you saved me from catastrophic losses. That would be one turning point, I think, in the community. And this ties back to maybe how the community viewed or used Quantopian versus internally where Quantopian was headed. I think that turning off live trading was probably, certainly at the time, was definitely the thing to do because, as Jean kind of alluded to earlier, it was a big distraction. And maybe, if we were the size of Google, all those distractions could lead to new products, but it was just a distraction. So that would be one turning point that I think turned off a lot of community members or caused a lot of rethinking of, why am I here?
Right. Yeah,
And
definitely. I mean, that's definitely the case. The amount of angry email that I received was pretty amazing. And it is definitely one of the decisions I look back on, and I'm just like, was that the right thing to do? The thing that always makes me unsure if we did the right thing is right thing for the business. I mean, by the way, because I definitely feel like pretty bad about turning it off on users like your story illustrates. So that doesn't exactly feel like the right thing. But for the business, trying to figure out what to do, the thing that I always think about is that it was small, but the group of people using Quantopian in that way to trade their own portfolio was just growing by itself. I mean, it was like totally neglected. We didn't mention it like anywhere on our website, our public website,
Mhm.
and yet people were still finding it and still using it.
Yeah.
And finding growth of any kind is really difficult. And
Mhm.
so I feel like I just at the time didn't appreciate how precious that kind of growth was.
Right.
That if you find a small group of people who are really passionate about something, that's a really special thing to find, and probably slowing down and thinking through what it would mean to shut it down, thinking through what the potential was for
Yeah.
that group.
Yeah,
Uh,
for us, it's interesting that you mentioned about growth. Alpaca is a small, I'll say startup, but they've been in business long enough that the internally what we're trying to change the thinking. And I think words really convey a lot of power that Alpaca isn't a startup company, it's a growth company. And I think at some point startups need to transition to growth and no longer be startups. And I kind of wonder if after 4 years, uh, midway through Quantopian's life cycle, maybe the transition should have been more thinking of we need to be a growth company.
I mean, I totally agree with that, but I think it's not based on time, it's based on key milestones, right?
Yeah.
The first one I think being alignment on a vision.
Mhm.
I think when I was reading your note, it just really landed. I was like, yeah, I always like to look back on things and think about, was there something within my power to do to change the outcome for the
Mhm.
better? I like to dwell on things. So I definitely, think a lot about things that didn't go the way I wanted and
That's
why.
not healthy, Foss.
Everyone keeps telling me that, but I don't know that I totally agree that it's unhealthy. Like it doesn't, I like thinking, I like thinking about things, I like thinking deeply about things. And, I love to learn. And I find it actually, literally everyone, I don't know if I was like over the top in my first email about how I felt about everything, but I don't feel like I'm hurting myself when I'm thinking about what happened. I don't feel bad about it. I'm now anyway. I mean, I think initially it was like devastating, but now when I'm looking back, like I just enjoy it. It's like intellectually like fascinating to me what we were doing and how it went. Yeah, so I feel like that alignment question, that's really like the first thing for a company. Like you have to have a clear vision of where you're going.
I was just going to say, another area that I don't think we were very aligned on is even that concept of community. I think we threw around the word crowdsourcing and without really defining what that was. And maybe two extremes, and there's probably three or four in between, but two extremes would be like crowd tasking. That's where you just create these small little micro tasks and you get a bunch of people to do them and then you aggregate them in the background. The other extreme would be something like Linux, open source, crowdsourced coding. And both of those I think you would call crowdsourcing, but they're really two completely different things. And I think that we could have done a better job of saying, what is this community? What are we trying to really get from the community?
Right.
Asking them to do.
Yeah. And like where on that spectrum is sort of like
Yeah.
the ideal. Another conflict, I'd love your opinion. So community is all about people helping each other, in my opinion, right? That's
Mhm.
like what really to me defines community. and having some things in common, right? So with technology, it's often like a community around a platform. You have this, operating environment or platform in common. So you can empathize with someone else's problem, you can understand it, you can reproduce it, and you can help them. So technology communities are really strong, but it's all about the people who are participating, like kind of giving and getting. And crowdsourcing is very different. I think it's more about third party observation of people and kind of harvesting, and it's not crowdsourcing as an incentive structure, it doesn't by itself motivate a community of people or, even if they're not a community, just like a set of people. So you always have to add an incentive, right? So we saw that we had to add, the allocations and the promise of payment, or we had to, create the contest. So it's, the thing that I think is really kind of interesting is community really is like a campfire. Like once it gets going, it sustains itself. Like if you stop feeding and pushing and incentivizing, it just stops.
Mhm. I think that comes back to maybe what you were saying about the spectrum from crowd tasking to open sourcing,
Yeah.
crowdsourcing like that, that the crowd tasking, yeah, the minute that you don't have any feedback or any incentive, that just goes away. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's people that spend hours, more than hours
Oh,
on
lifetimes.
open source, lifetimes
Yeah.
for nothing. And what is that all about? So
Well, I think
I
it's the same as you
I think
answering
it's a
questions
spectrum.
on the community, right? It's intrinsic. It's like an intrinsic motivation people have.
Yeah.
Where on that spectrum, like, is there any part of finance that should be in the open source end of the spectrum?
And this is just my idealistic me coming through, but I do not believe finance is or I'll just say finance in general, but trading in specific, I'll say trading is not a zero sum game. And yet everyone believes it is. In fact, it's so funny. I just the other day or week, I got this comment, question, whatever, about this guy who was trying to buy and sell Tesla, as an example.
Yeah.
And he was all upset because every time that he put in an order for Tesla, the price went up.
Yeah.
And he was convinced there was something rigged in the system. And in the nicest way possible, I tried to tell him, your order for 2 shares of Tesla has no bearing at all on the 5 million shares that are traded every day.
Right.
And somehow you have to get around that zero sum game. And I think all that is people just need to start to see there's more benefit from working together than there is in not working together. I mean, and I would think that would be very easy, but you need to prime the pump to get it going. Why I say it should be easy is I know for a fact that most people out there that are trading are not doing very well.
Mm.
And it should be pretty easy to say, hey, if we work together a little bit, you could do a little bit better than that because right now what you're doing just isn't working. And I would think that you could nudge people above that bar. But yeah, it's pervasive in finance that people don't want to show their cards.
Oh, it's like deeply, deeply rooted. What,
Yeah.
where do you think that comes from? Like, why are people so protective?
I think it's simply because they look at it as a game, as a zero sum card game that I can't show my cards.
I feel like it is true, right, for alphas. If you share an alpha, right, it's gonna degrade. So why? There are parts of the system you think don't function that way.
Right. Oh, and I think you're going in an interesting direction, boss. Part of the answer might be to separate the things that potentially are do have an impact from those that don't.
Right. I think that's like a really interesting set of questions. Like, where would you draw that line? Like, what? the alpha itself, like the signal, right? You can imagine, okay, fine. There's very few of those. First of all, they're hard to find, and they do disappear when
Mhm.
people when they're more broadly discovered. What would you put on the hey, it's better if we share this end of the spectrum, like the open source end of the
I think,
spectrum?
if you think of it, I'll just say, don't think of it. I witness 80% of the time that people put into an algorithm or a strategy is just getting it to work. I mean, I'm not talking about generating alpha. I'm just saying not not crashing.
Yeah,
There's huge chunks of just the infrastructure, and it's both on the actual execution, but the back testing, the data, all of that stuff. And that was actually where I thought that Quantopian was going, and or saw a real niche that it could serve. And that is almost creating a common vocabulary, a common set of tools, a common approach to be used for trading equities in specific. And that could all be done open sourced. And, in a lot of ways it was, with Zipline and stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Which has lived on and been integrated and implemented elsewhere, like
Yeah.
other platforms support it. That's a kind of oddly gratifying outcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. It makes me think like, yeah, we did some good work there on the design. It's a design that people appreciate and continue to use. I was, getting curious as you were talking about like, where the time goes for people when they're working on things, and years have gone by now since Quantopian shut down. And I'm wondering like, what do you see out there that is like the need for people that are trying to algo trade on their own?
I'll start with, on a real high level, just a framework. And what I mean by that is and I'll start off with a development framework. I don't think since leaving Quantopia, well, certainly while I was there, and then since leaving, I've been a preacher of the whole concept of thinking in terms of factors, thinking in terms of back testing those factors, and then putting those factors into implementation, and the little pitfalls in the way. And certainly one of them in the implementation is that fidelity of moving over from your backtesting environment to the
Yeah,
execution environment. So there's this whole framework of how one proceeds with coming up with a trading strategy. That's a real need, because what I see is people go out and look on some YouTube video. This is how you trade. You look for this moving average and this cross, and you do this. And the next day they're investing $10,000 in it. I think there needs to be like I said, an approach or vocabulary for actually how you trade. But more specifically, a back test, it would be ideal to have a online backtest engine. Short of that, just nicely accessible data at a reasonable cost. I don't know how people could be expected to afford data for trading. As you know, it's hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a month.
yeah,
And looking at Quantopian's original tagline, democratizing finance, I mean, I'm working with a lot of individuals who live in all parts of the world, that for them, they saved up their money and deposited $50 into a trading account, and that's what they have to trade with.
right.
And that's the majority of the world. That's an opportunity that needs to be filled. So some kind of framework for back testing, some kind of accessible data that's reasonably priced, I think is a big hurdle for a lot of individuals.
Yeah. It's an
Yeah.
interesting question on how to bring that price down.
Yeah.
Trading accessibility, you mentioned at the beginning, like fractional shares really,
Mhm.
really changed everything, right? Anybody
Yep.
can buy a fraction of any equity now. So that's a massive improvement in access.
Well, not only in access, but it goes back to that whole concept in my mind of a framework for trading. And that is, I preach to everyone too, don't trust the markets, don't trust your YouTube video on strategy, trust the math. And certainly one piece of math that bears itself out is if you diversify, it lowers your volatility. And fractional shares allow you diversification. So, it's not just
Yeah.
access, but it's actual being a smarter trader, I think.
Yep. I mean, that I love what you just said. I think really well put, that fractionals increase diversification. I also think that it is kind of amazing that, for single digit dollars, people can just try buying and selling a stock. You
Yeah.
know, like I think that that's kind of an amazing change in the world. So I'm wondering, now again, like I feel like you have this like pretty amazing vantage point because you're talking to like a really large share of the world's independent algo traders.
Mhm.
What are you excited about? Do you see like a technology that's coming along that you're super excited about, or like a trend among independent traders, or an asset class? Like, is there something that you're kind of looking forward to seeing unfold?
You know how earlier I said I was an optimist and generally look at the glass
Yeah.
half full? No, that there's no things that I'm looking forward to. I tend to see the bad things that I see happening. Crypto, in my mind, has done more harm for investors than I think, and it'll take a while to undo that.
Can you explain what you mean?
In that it's turned everyone into speculators.
Okay.
And throw out that whole idea of diversification and this and that and the other thing. It's just like, I'm going to buy Bitcoin because Bitcoin is going to go up forever. And, so I see that. I see and to a certain degree, options and futures trading is becoming a little bit more accessible to individuals,
Yeah.
but that is very complex. And I shudder when I hear some of these people, what they're doing, because they just don't understand it. And maybe that would be the other thing. In fact, I have a little side project. I don't know if I'll ever get it off the ground, but it's just explaining to people how trading works. In some ways, the of the world have done a disservice because that button that you click on to order 10 shares of Apple looks exactly like that button you click on Amazon to order a pair of sneakers. And people think that they're the same thing, and they don't appreciate that. First of all, it's highly regulated. And, that's the first thing, that someone's account gets locked out because they did this or did that. And they go, what? I can't just buy and sell anytime I want, anything I want. It's like, nope, there's regulations and rules, and people don't appreciate that. The other thing that I think that people don't appreciate as traders, as individual traders too, is how the markets really work. They have a kind of a warped idea, or a simplistic idea. I don't say warped, and it's understandable. It's that the market is one big exchange and everything happens instantaneously. And that isn't the case. As more and more people get involved with the markets, they just don't understand what they're doing. And then maybe even as simple as, there's probably 10 or 11,000 tradable equities right now in US markets. People should only be trading probably 2 or 3,000 of those, because a big chunk of them are these master limited partnerships or rights or warrants or 20 other different kinds of instruments that, if you don't know what you're buying and selling, you shouldn't be buying and selling it. But they just look at it as a symbol, and they said, oh, this symbol went up and I'm going to buy some too. And they just don't understand. So I think there's a real lack of knowledge that should be filled.
So what's the side project? Does it have like any definite form yet? It sounds like the goal is to help people
Oh
understand.
yeah, it's really, I want to write or have a website or a book on just that. It's kind of like, okay, here's how the markets work. Your trade isn't executed on it. The first thing that happens is they say, I want to trade on the New York Stock Exchange. That's, everyone thinks that their orders get executed on exchange.
Yeah.
So kind of start off and say, nope, probably half the orders aren't executed on an exchange, and this is how they get executed,
Yeah.
and stuff. And just kind of go through that execution process, the types of orders, why you should use them. I see so many people misusing the different order types, like stop orders and stuff.
Yeah.
And then going into data, another thing, I could write a whole book on data. It's, Foss, it's big data, and big
Yeah.
data isn't like little data, that it's messy. It's not what you think it is. There's timing.
Yep.
I get this all the time, that people get bent out of shape because this price was off by a penny. And I'm going, well, okay, yeah, it should be fixed, and it would be nice and everything if everything were great. But if that impacts your trading strategy,
Oh, right. Yeah.
you have other issues.
Right.
So anyway, it's understand where data comes from, and just a whole plethora of things, stock symbols. People come with, I want to buy this, but how come it's like, oh yeah, there's really four major symbologies that the different
Right. Yeah.
use, and here's the different kind of, this is, why does this one have a dot in it and this one have a dash, and all of that. So yeah, it's an exciting field, but yeah, so it's kind of takes the form of a website or a book, but nothing's public yet.
Oh, very cool. I think the antidote to what you're saying of people getting access to these like sophisticated instruments and then not fully understanding what's going on, right, is education. And one thing that makes me optimistic is a lot of people are very hungry to learn. Like they want to know how things work, and just getting access to the right kind of education, the right kind of information, the right kind of instruction is the antidote to that. And what makes me hopeful is people are very motivated. People really, want to learn and understand how things work.
Yeah.
And I think what's tough is it's one of the places where like the internet kind of falls down sometimes, where it's so valuable to get the attention of these people, people who want to trade. They're really sought after. And so there's just like a lot of noise to cut through, and it's hard to find like a source that's really, has sort of like a pure focus of education.
I'll ask you this. What's your feeling on something like the AI, like the chat GPTs? Are they fixing or hindering that
Oh,
growth?
that's a great question. I feel like it has the potential to do both.
Yeah.
So I found it like really extraordinary working with ChatGPT in two use cases, just things that I've been playing with. One is when I want to understand something like a concept or like a historical period or a method or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I have like a sort of like reflex building up where if I Google something and the stuff that I'm getting isn't really giving me a cohesive picture, it's, sort of stuff that's trying to just grab my attention. That's when I turn to ChatGPT and I'll, ask. And that I found to be like really powerful. I'm reading a book that's historical fiction, and it's about the wars between English Protestants and English Catholics in the 1600s, which I never studied, so I didn't know anything about. So I ended up asking ChatGPT about all this.
Hmm.
It makes it incredibly accessible.
Mm-hmm.
I love to talk to people and learn from people, and so it feels like that because it's very conversational. By definition, I'm not an expert in that area, so like I don't know, is it hallucinating or is it telling me the truth?
Yeah.
So I think that's like the problem, to be solved. But I think it's like really, really, really powerful in that direction. And this experience of like iterating and tailoring kind of like your own interface to the world.
Mm-hmm.
Google was amazing because it was like, oh, it's everything. I remember searching the internet for the first time with other search engines and how noisy they were. And then late 90s, like using Google and just being like, oh my gosh, this is the way it's supposed to be. It just like really cuts through the noise. With ChatGPT, I feel like it's so malleable and responsive, right? It's like this incredible way for me anyway, to learn things. I'm sure there's like lots of people that feel the same and differently. The other one is coding.
Gary, I don't know how that works. Well, I do know how some of it works, because I've actually seen my code show up on Chat
Oh,
GPT.
no way. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And it's kind of
Hey,
like,
are you gonna go on strike like the Hollywood
yeah,
writers?
there you
Yeah, you want
go.
some royalties from your code?
I certainly don't know if it really was, but it's funny that they use the same
Sure, looked
verbiage.
familiar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the same order of the instructions. But Yeah, that is scary how coding could really help. And that, I mean, but also it's scary that half of the things that I end up doing are I help people with getting they go, well, ChatGPT said this should work and it doesn't work. Fix it. And I'm going, well,
Why don't you ask
yeah,
ChatGPT to fix it?
yeah.
Well, actually, you know what? I think that's like the thing right now with coding. When I was so with ChatGPT, the things that I found it amazing at are like I wanted to automate some stuff with Google Docs. And so there's an API, but it's like massive. And I've never used it before. And to be
Right.
totally candid, I'm like not super interested in learning the Google Docs API. I just want to
Uh-huh.
like do
You
my
just want
thing.
to get one thing done,
I want to get
right?
one thing done. Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And so, ChatGPT's read it all. You can just ask.
Yeah.
So, but what I found is to really be productive, you have to almost be asking it to write sort of like at the function level. I haven't had any success anyway, like prompting it to create something, bigger than that, something that's like more structured.
Rewrite zipline for me.
Yeah. Or like, please refactor zipline, or can you take zipline and re-implement it in Go, please?
Yeah.
Things like that would be pretty amazing. But for more what I would describe as like disposable software, like scripts, or like I just need this like one function, or I don't know this API, write it for me, and then I'll kind of tailor it.
Mhm.
That's pretty amazing. I had coded professionally full time for like 15 years, and then had like a 5-year hiatus, and so it's like hard to go back because I gotta get my toolkit set up, and I don't, what language am I going to use, and where do I, like the whole tool chain and learning the APIs and stuff like that. So one thing that's been super cool is just the setup with ChatGPT and Notable, and just being able to start and do things right away
Mhm.
has been pretty amazing.
Before I lose my train of thought, I wanted
Yeah, please.
to bring something up. You had started talking about, or I think I asked you, is ChatGPT good or bad?
Yeah.
And this is the optimist in me coming through. So one of the things, and you hit on it, that working with these chatbots requires you to ask the right questions.
Hmm.
And even to the extent, and I do the same thing, and it sounds like you do, you need to be almost iterative. It's like
Yeah.
you ask it a
Yeah.
question and then you look at it and go, well, how about this? And I don't know how it does it, but ChatGPT is very good at, oh yeah, you do need to do this, or here, more information. But anyway, I have hope that the next generation moving up, working with these chatbots, starts to learn how to ask questions
Mm.
rather than right now where everyone is programmed to looking for answers. And if what we could do is develop more of a mindset for looking for the right questions, I think that would go a huge step towards a lot of the problems we have now with the disinformation, for example.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's super interesting. That is a
And
super interesting point. It's
so
almost like the hallucination problem is like I remember when spell check came out. For those listening, that's a feature that actually didn't exist at
that
the
was
time.
a great thing.
Yeah. And the red squiggly line. And I remember in the beginning, I was like, wow, I am tremendously bad at spelling. I had no idea. And I definitely got better at spelling because it's like a game, to try to avoid the red squiggly line.
Yeah, yeah.
But this new tool that we have hallucinates. And so when you're talking to it, I think you have to be on guard, right? And you have to be able to ask the right questions and follow-up questions, and
Mhm.
try to figure out if you can trust the answer.
Yeah.
That's a lovely thought, Dan. I hope you're right. And I think about like the way that my kids use it, and they're younger, and it's sort of the first really big technology that's come along in their lifetime where they're aware. Like I
Mhm.
remember like iPads and how amazing that was, iPhones and everything like that, just like the incredible increase in capabilities for mobile. And to my kids, that's just like totally normal. Like they don't know the world without that. So it's really interesting seeing them, experience like a transition like this for the first
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
I feel like I'm gonna watch them now, see what kind of questions they're asking. I think that's brilliant.
They're going
Yeah,
to turn you into a chatbot, then, but they're going
me.
to
Yeah.
they expect answers like that from you when they ask
Well,
questions.
I don't know what it is, but there is something about the way that ChatGPT writes that it's like I was talking to a friend of mine about writing a business proposal. He was working on a deal, and I was trying to help him think through like the structure. So we had a couple phone calls, and we were kind of honing in on what the key points were. And I was saying, what I usually do is like write out the deal points. And so he was like, all right, great, I'll do that. So what obviously happened is he then went to ChatGPT and said like, hey, write some deal points for me. And he sent me this document. And the way that it reads, to me, it seems like the more words that have been written about a particular topic, like the more words about that topic will be included in what's generated.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of like legal documents, 90% of it is not about the business terms, right? And it's about stuff that's like kind of, I think of as being sort of like market rate, terms that might change over time, but like for any given moment, they're sort of like the accepted market rate for those terms.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole thing was about those, because that's what's common to all these types of agreements. And like the thing you actually need to think about are the specifics of your business. So I feel like that's where I feel like it falls down. Like if you try to trust it to generate something in an area where you're really naive, you get this sort of like really, this like gross average that you just is not what you need.
Right.
It's not interesting. So I don't know. I think that'll be like another area to watch and see if it improves.
Mm-hmm.
But I love this concept of we're all going to get better at asking questions. That would be wonderful. Dan, this was awesome. I think we're reaching our time. So I just wanted to say thank you so much.
Well, yeah, and Foss, right back at you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and thank you for my time at Quantopian and being part of that.
Absolutely. And when the time is right, when you want to unveil your book or website or lecture series or whatever it is that you're cooking up, I know a big community of people that would love to hear it. So.